What should I prepare in terms of what would be most helpful to bring with me to the IEP?
I don't like walking into situations where I don't know what's going on. So sometimes with IEPs, I kind of feel a little caught off guard. What can I do to not feel so out of the loop before the IEP?
Right, it doesn't feel good to walk into this big unknown
Yeah.
thing, not knowing what's going to happen or what to expect.
Right.
There are, part of it is there will be new stuff that's brought up at the IEP that's unexpected for whatever reason, but there's a lot you can do to help with feeling that way. The most important thing that I would recommend and that I do is to request copies of the documents so that I can review them prior to the IEP meeting itself. So at your child's first, their initial IEP, there's going to be assessment reports, and then at least every 3 years thereafter, there's going to be significant, lengthy assessment reports to read. So when those assessments are being done, on years that those assessments are being done, I always want to see those ahead of time. And even when we're talking about scheduling the IEP is when I'll mention to the teacher, just so you know, I'm going to want to see copies of these assessments, 2 weeks before the IEP, so that I have time to review them thoughtfully on my own time. So I want to give them the heads up well in advance, so that they can get the documents to me in time. And I make the same request every year on looking at my child's goals ahead of time. So I ask the teacher to send those to me a week before the IEP or 2 weeks before the IEP, or however much time you would feel like you need. And by getting those drafts ahead of time, and remember the goals especially are just drafts. Well, at the IEP you can make adjustments or change or add or delete or whatever. But that gives me at least a starting point, and then I have the time to thoughtfully read through those documents, and I have the time to read through them along with a trusted source. So, you and your spouse might want to both read them and then talk about them, or I can talk about some of the things that came up with somebody who knows my child well or knows me well, to kind of wrap my brain around some of these things. And also by having the time to do that, it gives me time to write down what my questions are. I write all over these assessment reports and the goals, and questions that I want to ask when we're at the IEP, things that don't make sense to me. I'm not a psychologist, so for me to read a psychoeducational report that's 18 pages long, that's kind of a lot for me. That's not my background. So I do my best, but I always have questions about, what does this mean?
What's this acronym?
What is the acronym, or what does this percentile mean? Okay, the 20th percentile, is that good or bad?
Right.
Sometimes I don't know. It's not obvious. So it gives me time to write down those thoughts or those questions. Sometimes I can have some of those questions answered before the IEP. So there's nothing to say I can't contact the psychologist, send her an email and say, I have a question about these 3 things from the report. Maybe she can answer my questions via email, or I can save those questions for the IEP. Either way is okay. I find, especially with the goals, especially if I have a lot of changes that I want to have made, I'd rather do that a little bit ahead of time with the teacher, rather than use the time of the entire team when we're sitting there around the table. So I think that it's a useful way. At least they're not going to be putting assessments in front of you and goals in front of you that you've never seen before. So it's a good way to have at least an idea of kind of what to expect from the meeting.
And so when you have those before the IEP, in the week or 2 before the IEP, and you've kind of gone over them with a friend or spouse or whatnot, is it the kind of thing that it's too personal to share with a friend who possibly has gone through more IEPs than you? Or is that, I've found great comfort and guidance from friends who also have children with the same special need that my child has, and they've been able to give me some really good tips. But I don't know, is that too personal, or is that asking too much of someone to say, hey, can you look at my IEP, it's coming up with me?
I think it's funny that you ask, because as much as I do share information with my support people and ask for their input, now that you're saying that and I'm thinking about it, I don't think that I've actually asked for my number one support person to read that assessment report for my child. So I've read the report, and my son's father reads the report, but the person that I go to for my emotional support, I haven't asked her to read the document. And so So that's an interesting question. I think it sort of just depends. Maybe I do feel like that document is too personal, and my support person is my sister, so she's a family member, and she loves my son just like I do.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I don't want to cross that line of her being his Tia and a family support person who loves him, and I don't want to pull her too much into this clinical, this is how my son looks on paper, numbers, black and white thing, because it's just
Different
not how
roles.
her relationship is with him.
Right.
So I think it's really personal, and it depends on you and what you're comfortable with. If a friend of mine asked me to review their child's assessments in prepping for an IEP, I would be happy to do that. I think that I could provide good feedback and insight, and just they could bounce ideas off of me. So I don't think it's too much to ask, but I do think it's a personal choice on how much you want to share with other people.
Okay, so it depends on each person, and it depends on what world that person lives in terms of your support system or advice giver, or because I'm thinking of the people at our special needs parent support group, which we're not super good friends. We kind of just see each other at the support group, but they've got a wealth of information, and I might, run it by one of them,
Yeah.
but not necessarily like someone like my sister is to you.
Right. Yeah. I think it just depends on how your relationship is with each of those people, and that we have a network of support, and we can draw on different people for different pieces of it. I can't expect one person to provide support to me in every aspect of my life or of my kids' educational needs. So maybe one person's more of an emotional support, whereas one person is more of somebody who, like you said, has this wealth of knowledge, and I just want to share ideas with in that way. So I think that we piece it all together from our network that we have.
But definitely getting the IEP goals and drafts and reports ahead of time, I'm sure takes a lot of pressure off once you're actually there, because it gives you that insight and that knowledge beforehand. And then you can also work things out ahead of time.
Yeah, I think it's huge. I recommend it to all the parents that I talk to try to get those documents ahead of time.
That's great advice.